Thank you so much, panelists, for joining us, distinguished guests, and apologies for that slight delay. We're trying to get everyone on board. I'll just take you through some house rules before we kick off the session, which is our last session for the day. I'm so much excited to have you all join us. So we will mute you and unmute you. If we understand it's the era of technology. If you want to walk away from or do something, you can ask to pause the video, but we'll be pausing it if we realize that maybe something is happening. So please bear with us. We'll be muting you and unmuting you and turning on the video and off, depending on who is speaking. And I'll just turn on Mr. Chams's video. Then again, we have a Q&A section to the attendees. Kindly send in any questions, feedback. I will be reading out those to our panelists as the conversation, continues. And this is our final session. We are so much excited to have you all join us. The aviation sector is very crucial to development and growth across the continent. I mean, how else are we supposed to do business without air travel? Again, it's one of the sectors that have been hardly hit by the pandemic, and yet so much opportunity lies ahead, regardless of the challenges. So as we make sense of the uncertainty that has happened around the COVID-19 pandemic, we hope that our panelists will help us understand what lies ahead, the opportunities, and also make sense of some of these things for us during this particular session. I'd like now to introduce you to our moderator for the day, Arnold Segawa. Arnold, can you kick it off?
Many thanks for that, Maggie. I hope everyone can hear me right. If you could just wave maybe if you can hear me very well. Super. Thank you for that, Maggie. Aviation is definitely the backbone of any modern economy. And there are reasons for that. I mean, if you want to travel or to do business between countries or even two cities, the best way for you to do this is by air. The mobile phone, many of us are relying on it today, that we are using to speak right now is by far important. It's all very, very rare to see phones put on a ship and then they arrive after 3 months. However, 2020 has proven to be quite a tasking year for the aviation sector. Now, with the COVID-19 pandemic, many governments, I would argue, have folded and have had to close their doors to international travel. In some severe cases, some have even cut down on domestic travel. Good evening, bonjour, bonsoir, guten tag, bienvenue. Welcome to this panel where we touch base on all matters aviation on the continent and try to just envision what the aviation space will look like after the current predicament we find ourselves in. As Maggie mentioned earlier on, my name is Arnold Segawa. I'm joining you from what once was the Pearl of Africa, Kampala, Uganda. And joining us for this quite erudite conversation is Adefunke Adeyemi, who's the Regional Director, Advocacy and Strategic Relations for Africa at IATA. Also, we're joined by Captain Idris Cheju, who's the Managing Director of Prodigy Avia Solutions. We're also joined from the World Bank by Ricardo Politi, who's the Global Director, Energy and Extractive Industries, and also the Regional Director, Infrastructure for Africa. That's, of course, at the World Bank Group. And we're also joined by Zemedine Negatu, who is the Global Chairman of Fairfax Africa Fund, LLC. And last but not least, Chamsu and Jorin, who is the Director of Government Affairs and Market Development at Boeing International Sub-Saharan Africa, Aviation Safety Director. That's, of course, Africa Boeing Commercial Airplanes. Let's start this off with Ade. We've had so many conversations over the past 5 years, I would argue, on the challenges that the aviation space finds itself in. I would want to break it down to Sub-Saharan Africa, but listening to a panel earlier on with Professor Lopez, that definitely is not the way to go. Some of the challenges, Adeyemi, that we've seen on the continent on the aviation space move, it's quite wide, from tax predicaments. Now there's a COVID-19 pandemic across the space, just at a time when we were just beginning to find our feet. Orders are coming in, and then this hits us. Just give me a sense of what a best case scenario of a recovery looks like, Ade.
Thank you very much, Arnold. And it's good to see my brothers, Shamsu, Captain Idris, Negatu, and also the gentleman from World Bank. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you, and hello to all the participants who are joining us from all parts of Africa. Thank you, Arnold. You rightly assessed the situation. Before the COVID-19 crisis, I mean, things were already quite bad for aviation, in the sense that it's an industry that traditionally doesn't really make a lot of profit anyway because of its business model and its financial structure. And in Africa in particular, so many things bedeviled aviation in Africa. One is the fact that, you know, airfares are very high, high taxes and charges, government policies not necessarily supporting the growth and sustainability of the industry, lack of cooperation amongst African airlines, and so many other issues. Now, over a concerted period of time and in a very focused manner, for the past 5 years, different stakeholders across the value chain had been trying to address these issues. And we had, you know, made some progress, not as much as we would have liked, but we had made some progress. And I want to specifically refer to 2 policy initiatives that we had started working on. Negatu, you'll remember that back in 2014, we launched an African connectivity study that was done by IATA to look at how key markets on the continent would fare if they were better connected by air. And it was really a seminal study that showed not just us in the aviation industry, but also politicians and the key decision makers, what it could look like if aviation really was given a chance. And that study showed some really big numbers. Over that time, over 5 years, we came to a point where the single African air transport market was launched in January 2018 by African presidents led by President Kagame, who at the time was the president of the African Union. And since then, we've been working tirelessly to see how we can really increase connectivity across Africa. I'm stressing the issue of connectivity because it is fundamental to moving people, goods, and services across the continent. And that speaks directly to the issue of integration, prosperity, and unity of Africa as a continent. Now, what happened with the COVID is, as we were just starting to see some traction on this policy initiative, COVID hit. Now it hit aviation one of the hardest because borders simply shut down. As at our analysis at the middle of May this year showed that air travel, meaning passengers traveling, stopped by 96%, meaning almost none. The only things that were moving across Africa were cargo, essential services, food, and medicines to help fight the pandemic. So in one incident, the COVID showed the 2 faces of how, you know, connectivity can be, you know, beneficial, but can also be devastating. It was devastating because passenger numbers dropped. And because of that, because people were simply not traveling, the connectivity that supported learning, working, trading, adventure, leisure, education, and all the things that aviation brings simply came to a halt. But on the other hand, aviation was the one that was able to really facilitate the effective fighting of COVID by states. So the picture that we face right now with the COVID shows that, you know, aviation that supports the livelihoods of about 6.2 million through aviation and its related businesses, that is at risk. 3.5 million, half of that is at risk right now, currently with the situation in which we find ourselves. Already 1 million jobs have been lost across the continent. Aviation also supported, you know, 55.8 billion of GDP in Africa as at our last conservative analysis. And already that is at risk by over half. We're estimating that the loss of this two GDPs from aviation's contribution is about $35 billion. And finally, looking at the traffic, it just simply, like I said, it simply disappeared at some point. So this is where we were. Now, where are we in terms of going forward? The industry has been proactive about restart. The industry has been working with ICAO and all of the aviation stakeholder universe to work on a set of guidelines, biosecurity guidelines that would give confidence to both government and passengers to restart both reopening of the airspaces as well as for passengers to travel again. And these biosecurity measures look at the entire end-to-end journey. I'm sure you've seen a lot of this being promoted by both IATA and every different other stakeholders. So that's the one element. The other issue, though, is that because the airlines have been so devastated by this, and I'll speak to airlines in particular, but this also affects all of the aviation businesses, is that financial relief to the industry is critical at this moment in time. And we have been engaging with various institutions and states, including the World Bank, I'm happy you're on the call, seeking for financial support to the industry to help the industry survive and then recover from the devastation of the COVID. So I'll pause here so that we can hear some other thoughts. But of course, Arnold, that I still have a lot to say.
Definitely. Thanks for that, Dade. Let's bring in Ricardo. You've touched on the issue of the money. I don't want to call it money. That's really short-sighted in a way. The financing, and we've seen Lufthansa getting a bailout of close to 10 billion US dollars, 10.1, if I'm not mistaken, billion US dollars from the German government. Ricardo, just to bring you into the picture, in the past, we've seen the World Bank Group, prior to 1945, it was initially known as the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. And priority for the World Bank, I don't want to think for you, you're the one who works there, has not necessarily been something that would think of as leisure. Or maybe secondary, something like the aviation space. It has been more around bridges or supporting the primary core of many of these devastated economies in the past. I mean, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Give me a sense of right now where we stand. Is aviation a primary sector that the bank looks at right now and says, at this particular time, this is something that we need to resuscitate with utter expediency? Ricardo, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I think, can you hear me now?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Yes, so first of all, a good afternoon to all of you. A good afternoon from a very rainy Washington today. I have to say that, first of all, I would like to thank Ida. I think she did a perfect introduction to this subject, so I'm very grateful to her. The problem on aviation is a problem which is not only in Africa, of course, it's a global issue. You realize that aviation is based on tourism, on trade, and with all the reduction in amount of trade all over the world and basically the minimization of tourism, this is creating a huge array of problems. I have to say, I had a very, very close look at the aviation industry in Africa. And I have to say, from 2008 to 2018, actually, the industry was able to have a compounded annual growth rate in terms of new capacity of 4.6%. So actually the situation was not, it is not structurally, let me rephrase, it was not structurally incredibly bad before COVID. Actually, tourism was raising. The 2010 World Cup, Football World Cup, was a big event in order to improve the airports and to have more capacity added. A huge success, certainly for South Africa, but for Africa as a whole. I think that now, post-COVID, we are in two periods. There is a short term and a longer term. I have to say, in the short term, I think it is paramount that all the good things that we have achieved are not going to be lost. I mean, or at least we can minimize the losses that we have had, let's say in the past few months. Certainly one day tourism will start again in what, in my opinion, is probably the most beautiful continent on earth. And certainly business opportunities are certainly there. So there is a short term and long term. In the short term, what I notice is that for governments it's very difficult. You know, this is a panel on aviation, and I love it, I have to say. But for governments at the moment, I think what is important are health, security, all these kind of matters are paramount. You have to think that with the crisis, fiscal revenues have gone down enormously. There are far less money available, and there are a lot of expenses in security, in health, I repeat. So I think the World Bank is certainly ready to help governments all the time. But what I see at the moment is that certainly there are very important issues to be dealt with until, at least in this first phase of the pandemic. As soon as we will have a solution, being it a vaccine or better therapeutics and all the rest, I think that there is a lot of work, and the World Bank will support it, in the whole aviation sector in Africa. We found that the industry needs to be transformed. For the time being, the African aviation sector, in our opinion, needs to tackle at least 5 challenges for the longer term post-COVID. One is that the intra-African air transport connectivity are among the lowest in the world. The second part is that air transportation in Africa is unaffordable for the average African population. And what is really even more damning is that not only is it unaffordable, but the airfares are actually 2-3 times higher than in Europe. Load factor are around 70%, which is pretty low. Actually, these are all data pre-COVID. And I have to say, notwithstanding higher airfares, usually airlines are not profitable. As Ida was saying a few minutes ago, it's a matter of airport charges, insurance costs, and all the rest. Infrastructure have improved enormously, I have to say. Airports are far better. There are 2 big continental gateway. One of them is certainly Joburg. The other one is certainly Addis Ababa. Kenya is rising very quick with the airport. So you can see that the situation pre-COVID was improving. But air traffic control, air navigation system needs to be updated. We're really ready to help on that, and we're working already on that. And then I would say that there is another point, which is the need to have a better regulatory framework for the whole continent, and have maybe only a regulator that can help the development of the industry. The industry is key to the development of Africa. I hope I answered your question.
Right, definitely. You've touched on a few points that we will definitely be expounding in the course of this particular discussion. Let me bring Zemadene into the picture here. Ethiopia boasts, I would say, as one of the poster children when it comes to the aviation space. If I would even go as far as arguing the only one on the continent. We all know it might be the only one that's profitable, but that's subject to debate, since some airlines are not keen on sharing their financial statements. Give me a sense of this particular predicament that Ricardo has touched on. African airlines operate in such a tough operating environment. If we were to look at cost-wise, as Ricardo has mentioned, 2 to 3 times is definitely the norm. If you have to compare that to the distance, let's say, from Dar es Salaam to, let's say, Dakar, and you just compute that to the equivalent in the US or even Europe, it's way expensive here. How essential is it for someone who is in your space, I would say a fully fledged person in the private sector, how essential is it for you to actually move this conversation further, or do you even have a role? I could be posing this question, yet in your line of work, you're ripping big
So good to see you, Arnold, once again, and thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. So let me start by giving you a picture of Africa's aviation, in particular the airline industry, so that we have a frame of reference when we discuss the industry. I would argue that Africa's aviation is in crisis, right? It's actually in a structural crisis. The reason I say that is the airline industry as a whole in Africa has not made money in years combined, except for one airline, which is Ethiopian Airlines. In fact, if you pull out the data and if you extract Ethiopian Airlines out of the African financial performance, African Airlines performance for every year for the last, 5 years, the industry as a whole has lost money. But when you add Ethiopian, it minimizes the loss. So that by itself should tell you that there's some structural problem with aviation. None of them money. They're all. So when we look at COVID, I see is actually a cover by a governments and the airlines that were in crisis with, to use COVID as an excuse to get bailouts for bad business models that should not be salvaged. I mean, this is my main argument. This is not to bail up the national interest and reasons for keeping them all should be real, though. And I don't need to mention names, but almost all of them were not viable pre-COVID. We're talking about January this year, February this year. So only 6 months ago, if an airline was not viable for the previous X number of years, the fact that COVID came and exacerbated the failed business model should not be used by governments and the airlines to bail them out. So the solution has to be to rejig, redo, or completely start from a blank sheet of paper of airlines in most African countries. There are a few exceptions, but most of them really are not worth salvaging because they're not salvageable. Now, I know that's a pretty strong statement, but myself...
That's quite heavy. That's quite heavy.
But we're not mentioning names here, so you can guess who the ones that should be salvaged. But I say that not just as an inflammatory statement, but myself, my team, our investment banking team, we've done 14 airlines in Africa, capital raising, restructuring, strategies. So it's based on hands-on experience, what we see on the ground that is making conclude in such a way. Now, not all is lost. I think there are easy solutions, easy to recommend, but hard to implement. A flag carrier flying to Heathrow or New York or some long haul just to show the flag. It makes no business sense. The markets individually as standalones in Africa are too small to support national flag carriers as standalones. So the solution is, and we see this everywhere else. I'm in Washington, I'm in the United States here. Even in the US, we have done now consolidation. In 1978, we had the liberalization of the airline industry in the United States. We have, hundreds of airlines mushroomed. Eventually, we realized even in the wealthiest country on earth, we cannot sustain that level of airline numbers. Okay, and the traffic here is huge. I mean, there's no question about it. But so now we have essentially 5 airlines in America, would dominate something like, 70, 80% of the traffic in this country. So I take that to Africa and I compare it to what the Europeans have done. And I've argued this many times. Why don't we follow the same model, have 2 or 3 anchor airlines in Africa? The rest are collaborators with the anchor airlines. I'll give you an example. In Europe, we just have 3 airline groups: Lufthansa, Air France KLM, and IAG, which is essentially the British Airways Iberia consortium, right? These 3 airlines own everything else, or at least in partnership, partial equity sharing. These anchor in an economy the size of the EU or the Europe that is infinitely bigger than Africa, where tens of millions of people more travel within Europe.
Zamedine, let me just jump in here.
Standalones don't. They chose. Yeah.
Let me just jump in here. This is an argument that you and I have had in the past 2 years, and just before, very briefly, because I need to bring in the other two panelists who have not yet said anything. But this is an argument that you and I have had, and my comeback has always been, it's quite easier for the U.S. to do that as opposed to a continent here that is spanning over 53 countries, and of those 53, I am sitting in one of them, which is quite tiny, but has over 50 languages itself. Don't get me started on Nigeria. Adefunike is laughing already. So consolidation on a continent like this, God knows in the East Africa community, is hard enough, let alone 54 countries where we're over 1,000 languages. Very briefly.
So Arnold, I said it's easier to recommend the solution than to implement. That's why I prefaced my comment. But that's not the only solution left. Listen, I'm a financial guy. I'm in the investment banking, the private equity business. I see numbers, and numbers tell a story. Not a single African airline today, with the exception of Ethiopian Airlines, is financially viable. It's been like that for years. So if something doesn't work for years and years and years, why do we keep trying to dream of hope for that it would work in the future? So COVID just exacerbated the problem. And I think government, a lot of them are looking for bailouts saying, well, COVID killed me. No, you died before COVID. And I don't think that should be, taxpayers' dollars should be going to fund non-viable airlines. There are a few exceptions. Even if they don't make money, given the right frame, the right time, I think they will do well. But most of them are not salvageable. So partnership, consolidation, working together, I think is the way to beat it. Otherwise, the offshore carriers, which carry 80% of Africa's travel, will go to 90, or maybe eventually go to 100%. So I don't think that's the solution for Africa. So I'll stop here and I'll follow up later on.
Right. Fascinating stuff. Chamsu, let me bring you in. I just saw you laughing at this whole thing when we were talking. I would say arguing. Just give me a sense of your take on this particular notion that Zamedine just brings to the table. And also, I would argue you've had a tough year, Chamsu. I mean, Boeing, you've been in the news this past I wouldn't even say 6 months, 9 months.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Arnold. It's a pleasure to see on the panel so many friends and those whom I don't know also, but it's a real pleasure. I've listened to Funke, to my friend Zem, and to those who spoke before me. And I have to say that I agree with what has been said. The pre-COVID, the airlines, in the aviation sector in Africa was suffering. So COVID has only compounded the situation and make it worse. But the structural problems were there. And to illustrate that, I just want to give an example. 80% of the airlines in Africa have less than 10 aircraft. So imagine all the structure that you put in place to run an airline with less than 10 airplanes. And possibly the unit cost, the fixed unit cost is high already. Before you add the variable cost, which is related directly to the business. So I agree with them, structurally it's not viable. And that needs to be reviewed. Challenges are what you said, Arnold, it's a lot of decisions, a lot of centers of decisions. Luckily, there are opportunities. One of them is the SATAM, which now give a market to each of those existing airlines, provided that they have the resources to go after this market. That's where our friends from the World Bank and even them as a financier comes in. Today, African airlines don't have access to the equipment they would need provided that they are viable, they cannot even have access to the equipment at the right level of financing as the competitor because of the risk perception and the conditions that are attached to it. So that's an area where we need to be creative and find a way to create an environment where African airlines have access to affordable financing. Some initiatives are being taken, and I hope with the World Bank, with the African Development Bank, and the TDB, all these financial institutions on the continent, we come up with a solution to access affordable financing. And the other issue that we talked about that Funke mentioned was the charges. The fact that the airports and all the charges are disproportionate to the traffic, to the fares. When you take an air ticket price, more than half of it is charges and taxes. This is not acceptable. Nowhere can that work. So there are issues that were existed before that COVID compounded, and we need to address them. It will take, luckily, aviation is very resilient. I believe that by the mid of the next decade, we will get back to the pre-COVID trend. And maybe we should take that time to really think through the whole system and be creative, come up with an innovative solution. I don't think it's impossible for the whole continent to agree on some form of structuring. Ethiopia has been doing something that is worth pursuing, is partnering with different countries to build a group, to build a system that can be viable. Maybe another airlines or two or three, four airlines can be formed that way. And we can have a 4 strong airlines across the continent with a lot of partners working together to serve the continent. So that's my first thought about what has been said so far. Obviously, for us as Boeing, as OEMs, it is a very difficult year, and that comes directly from the fact that our customers are struggling. If they don't buy airplanes, we don't make airplanes. If we don't make airplanes, we don't sell them. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Chamsu. Last but not least, I want to bring in Captain Idris Cheju. As you can imagine, a captain himself, this was quite deliberate for him to come last, because it would be unfair to talk about journalism and not bring in someone as seasoned as Maggie Mutasi, or talk about aviation and not have a captain on the panel. Now, you have mentioned quite something interesting, Chamsu, around 80% of, I love me some good statistics, 80% of African airlines have less than 10 planes in their fleet. Idris, just speak to this particular predicament that we are seeing, this rush to have national carriers across the continent. And I want you to segue that into something that was said by on an earlier panel by Samba Bathili, who was complaining about Africans sending their children across the globe, to study medicine or anything and everything. They could even go and study African studies in a European country. Just give me a sense of how essential it is, Idris, for the African aviation space to have fully fledged institutions and aviation institutions, aeronautical engineering institutions right here for us to actually just leapfrog and just realize some low-hanging fruit. Idris?
Thank you very much, Arnold. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Once again, Arnold, Maggie, everybody, thank you very much for having me on this panel. It's quite a pleasure to participate to this aviation discussion. So Arnold, just to attend to your question, I've had the pleasure to attend to the previous panel that we had about financing, etc. And it's quite amazing how the diagnostic that we make on other industry is pretty much the same also for the aviation industry. Honorable Minister Hott, I've mentioned earlier that their current focus right now is to develop capabilities for Senegal and the continent to actually be self-sufficient and more resilient to different threats and attend in a better way the opportunity that come the way. So James mentioned something earlier quite interesting as well along with Funke. They mentioned about operating cost of the airline. When it comes to an airline business model, it is extremely complicated to actually forecast the revenue because so many factors come into play, as opposed to controlling, the cost, the unit cost, when it comes to a particular structure. I also noticed that along the conversation, we are mainly focused on national carrier, flag airline, national carrier, getting, interventions from different financial institutions. So what we are really focusing on, when I say we, is us as a consultancy firm trying to make a difference on the continent in partnership with so many others companies, that we are trying to make the ecosystem understand that we need to have a better control of the supply chain. We need to have a better control of our capabilities and what we can actually produce on the continent. I think Mr. Negato mentioned earlier Ethiopian Airlines, which is, well, the most profitable airline on the continent. Then what we need to understand and know is that they didn't actually become the best airline in the continent by hazard. They had a vision, and they actually start a long time ago putting the foundation, of a sustainable business, starting with human capability infrastructure, meaning that they actually start investing very early in every different aspect of the airline when it comes to training. Today, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Gedegatu, but Ethiopian Airlines Academy is now capable of providing pilots, cabin crew, engineers, financial, commercial, every single position that you can think of within an airline. And then to the best of our knowledge, this is the only major training academy that we have on the continent. The other training facilities are attending to a specific, aspect of the business, etc. So, Arnold, to answer your question, the growth that we are anticipating, even pre-COVID, and what we are looking for to reach post-COVID, could not be reached if we do not focus on talent acquisition and capacity building. We have been exposed to so many operations in West and Central Africa, trying to advise airlines to be more profitable by improving their decision-making process, by improving their GRC mechanism, etc. And then you will be amazed how much money is being wasted because the process is not lean, because there are so many individual perception of the industry that are taking the lead over the common sense. Earlier, you were laughing about the fact that we are 54 countries on the continent, and then, it's going to be very difficult for us to have the American business model based on consolidation after so many years. And you're absolutely correct. What is making now basically, should I say, our main advantage as African is also, unfortunately, setting up the highest barrier to reach now the level that we are trying to achieve. Because now in West and South Africa mainly, we are looking at countries which are favoring sovereignty over, joint collaboration, interstate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Just one last comment. I'm sure that many of you have heard about the AirCMAC project. The AirCMAC project, if I recall, was a new business, a consolidated business model that they wanted to have in the CMAC region, where they wanted to have a carrier which will actually provide the transportation system for Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, etc. I think in terms of 20 to 25 million dollars were injected for the feasibility study, roughly. And where are we now? Nothing has been done. I think the project has been aborted or canceled, something like that. So there is a long way to go. I think there is a long way to go before we can actually pretend to copy and paste the American business model or even the European one.
Thank you for that, Captain. We happen to have some comments on Zoom. If any of the participants just want to leave those on there, I'll be happy to start with, well, this happens to be just a comment. I agree with Mr. Nagatu, the aviation sector. It's from Jacques Mahamba. The aviation sector is struggling. COVID should not be an excuse. May the African governments come up with vibrant policies to salvage this sector. Still, Jacques Mahamba actually poses a question. Can the panelists elaborate on the effects of structural adjustment programs on the aviation sector in Africa? That's quite broad. I think structural adjustment, I don't want to lean towards the Washington consensus and the 10 points that came from, well, between the World Bank, the IMF, and we're not pointing fingers, Ricardo. If you're comfortable taking it, you can always take it. Otherwise, maybe you could just touch on this particular question, if you can maybe elaborate on the effects of structural adjustment programs on the aviation sector. I once spoke to a Zimbabwean who was bragging about the slot that they had at Heathrow and all these very, very robust airports, and now they're all gone. Thanks to a certain somebody who told them, you know what, you need to privatize or you need to do the other. Ricardo, take it away.
So first, thank you very much. I have to say, I found, I mean, someone said it earlier and I agree. I mean, the sector already had certain characteristics in Africa before COVID. We said about the lack of profitability, the high tariffs that make it unaffordable for most of the population, high airport costs, other operating barriers. So I have to say load factors that were pretty low. So I think this is the kind of environment we have to consider. Obviously what happened with COVID is important, but we all hope that it is transient in nature, even though it made things more difficult. I have to say that what we noticed in Africa is that there are very high market access barriers. So basically there are very high barriers to non-flag carriers. So every country usually tend to favor their flag carrier, which makes that the market is far less open. The market is also characterized by very low penetration rate of low-cost islands, exactly for the same reason. I have to say the African Union in January 2018 launched the Single African Air Transportation Market, which is to which 33 African countries sign up. The idea was what has been evoked by all the colleagues here on the panel. It's really the idea to create a single unified market for transport, liberalize civil aviation in Africa, and covering that there is far more of a regional approach. So I think that's really the key point: liberalizing, allowing for independent, willing entrepreneurs to enter the space, without, even though they are not flag carrier. That doesn't matter. What is important is to develop these in the continent. I have to say in general, and this is the data, in terms of return on investments, actually airlines are I'm talking about the, if you want, aviation cycle, but airlines are among the lowest in terms of return on investments compared, for example, to lessors, handlers, airports, travel agencies. So this is a structural issue that covers the globe in its entirety. But I do believe that the first step, and that's to answer the question from Jacques, if I may say, Jacques, it is really that reforms that open the market to entrepreneurs, that open the market to non-flag carriers, open the market to low-cost carriers. The case of Ethiopian Airlines is important. If Ethiopian was able to make it with their own model, as Captain Idris said a few seconds ago, I mean, not everybody has the same model, but they show that it's possible. And it is also the fact that the airport in Addis Ababa is pretty efficient and all the rest. So it's a combination. But I think that many African countries could add. The important would be to open the market, liberalize it, make sure that the government, two things: governments cooperate on a regional basis, and they create the right regulatory framework to attract investments. Because I'm sure there are a lot of companies all over the world interested in the African market.
Thanks for that, Ricardo. Ade, let me bring you back in. I feel it's very unfair for us to dash off to COVID and whatever is happening in this particular sector. We run to COVID this and COVID the other. Before COVID came around, still, there were no fifth freedom rights between majority of the countries on the continent. And this is something that just has been going forever. Between the Yamoussoukro declaration, that is somewhere on a cupboard, you know, collecting dust, signed over what, 19 years ago? And then COVID comes around and suddenly now we point fingers, hey, COVID is bad. Where's the political will? Where's the fifth freedom rights, with the exception of maybe Ghana, Rwanda, and a few countries that you could point out here and there? We just don't have the connectivity that we just need. And now here we are saying COVID is the elephant in the room, yet we are to blame. Tell me where you're coming from as IATA. How often is this something that you're pushing, or are you even pushing it?
Thank you, Arnold. I think IATA has always supported the concept of liberalization. We believe that aviation is the business of freedom. Aviation gives the world the freedom to connect, and that connectivity drives both economic and social development. So I think that as a general principle is something that we push, and that we'd like people who are at least listening in, and even those on the panel, to appreciate that, you know, for us, aviation is not just a means of transportation from, you know, one point to another. No, as much as aviation does facilitate that almost a global connectivity, what it really does, the underlying effect of aviation, is that it supports and promotes livelihoods and makes people's lives better through that connectivity. So that's the first thing I'd like to say. The second is that we don't blame COVID for all aviation's woes. Aviation has had many challenges over the years, and structurally, we've always talked about this. On the African aviation scene, we have been talking a lot for many years about all of the challenges that have already been articulated on the call by all my colleagues here today. Issue of connectivity, affordability, profitability, you know, infrastructure, and the regulatory framework. And so to your point about the political will, I want to talk about why this moment in time is an opportunity for everyone, from all of the decision makers, the presidents, you know, ministers, you name it, everyone in that space, to the supporters of aviation, whether they're international donors, partners, people who can support the structural issues, to the businesses themselves. It presents an opportunity, and this is why I want to say this. Number one is this: COVID is not the only problem that we have, but it is a problem that really brought everyone to a standstill. And it's not just for African aviation. Even the areas of the world where they consolidated, let's talk about the US, for example, they still needed a bailout from their government. Europe, where they have a fantastic single market that really does what it says on the tin, i.e. all the things that I've mentioned, the social development, it also, they also needed support from their governments. It is the nature of the business of aviation, for airlines in particular, that is always tricky. So any shock, it's an industry that's very vulnerable to any kind of shock. We had a volcanic eruption some years ago that affected the industry. All prices affects the industry. So it's not a question of just the COVID-19, it's the structural makeup. However, that structural makeup can be addressed by what I call the key opportunistic policy issues. And this goes to the point that Ricardo made about having the right kind of regulatory framework, supported by your question, Arnold, about political will. I truly believe, as an African woman, that the single African air transport market is the policy initiative that can transform aviation in Africa, because the initiative itself will affect so many other elements that we need to address for aviation. It will open up the market, liberalizing the skies in terms of fifth freedom between African cities. What that will do is it will increase both the number of city pair connections and frequencies across those cities. And just to give a practical example of what that means, is that if today I saw between Nigeria, Lagos and Accra, when they opened up their markets to each other on a fifth freedom basis, businesses in Lagos opened up in Accra and vice versa. People who were living in one city were working in the other city. It just changes the landscape completely. So connectivity leads to productivity, leads to, wonderful cycle, continuous virtuous cycle of growth and development. So that's the first thing. The other thing that this SATAM will do is that it will also help address the issue of affordability. And again, this is in a perfect world, but these things will happen. It probably will take some time, but they will happen. Affordability today is a key issue. Out of almost 3 billion Africans and counting, only about 100 million travel by air. This is our analysis up until last year. So that's just a tenth of the continent. Yet the potential, the biggest opportunity is here. There's no African carrier, and I'm saying this, very, very clearly and very publicly, that can hope to play in any other market that is not their home. You can't go and compete with places where they already have established hubs. You can only play at home, and our home is the African continent. There's enough to do there. Arnold, I'm going to wrap it up in a minute. I can see that you're about to jump in, but I'm just trying to say that this is the opportunity. And so with that opportunity also comes the airlines aspect. There needs to be more cooperation, and Negatu is right that there needs to be consolidation of airlines. I believe that once these things open up, the airlines, whether by their own natural choice or just by market forces, will be compelled almost to cooperate with each other and to partner where it's necessary. We also did an analysis last year, I don't know if you recall, Shamsu, and we looked at how many airlines have come and gone in Africa since the 1960s. It was almost 400. So we know the fact that it is simply not a sustainable model. You can't carry on this way and hope that everything is going to continue that way. So it will force that. Infrastructure will improve, and the regulatory framework will improve as well. Do the right thing, focus on the right thing. I think the SATAM is absolutely fundamental to changing the structural issues for Africa. And the final point to add is that now we have the launch of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The SATAM will be a facilitator of that initiative. It will fast track the implementation of creating the largest trading bloc that the world will see and will help to boost intra-African trade by 50%. Finally, don't let us take the ideological position that bailouts from government are simply that, bailouts to alien airlines. No, the airlines serve a purpose. So please support the ones that you feel have the right business model and use that as an opportunity for the investors and the financing of companies to say you need to do things the right way before we can fund you. So that's an opportunity to get them to do things differently. Thank you.
Well, when it comes to bailouts, South African Airways has gotten so many bailouts and is still getting another. I think they got another one this year too. So yes, it's not just a matter of getting bailouts, but you keep on hearing there's a structural reform, there's management change, there's a new CEO. There's one CEO who said he's going to turn around South African Airways in a particular span of time and offered his salary. I was in Joburg at that time. I couldn't believe it. He also resigned. But moving on, Negatu, I want to bring you in. There's a few things that well, you did touch at the beginning. Ade has also just highlighted them, and for me, what the low-hanging fruit. I think we could talk to Chamsu about long-haul flights and getting a new fleet and all those very, very technical matters. Same as Idris, but there's low-hanging fruit that can easily be attained. I think in a week or even two. One of those is what I was just asking Ade. Something as simple, well, I'll argue is simple, like fifth freedom rights. And yes, she's touched on a few matters, but give me a sense of where you sit if you were at the helm of the AU and had the power to summon 54 heads of state. What would you tell them about aviation, and what is the low-hanging fruit in your book?
But first and foremost, I would not qualify to be the head of the AU as an American, so let's put that aside. But I'll tell you my views. If you want to have successful aviation industry in Africa, in particular the airlines, you have to have the mindset, create a culture that says airline is a business. It's not an NGO, it's not a charitable organization. It needs to be run like a business. Yes, it serves a public good, but it won't be around for long if we don't treat it and run it as a business. I mean, I don't even think this is low-hanging fruit. This is so obvious, but it's not being executed that way. Okay, so whoever's thinking of running airlines in Africa needs to create a culture, a work culture that says we're going to make money. Even though it's a low-margin business, we still have to make money to survive. We're going to recruit the best and the brightest who know how to run an airline. We're not going to bring in the CEO of a brewery to come run an airline. It just doesn't work that way. And third, as I mentioned earlier, we'll say from day one, we're going to collaborate with others. We're not going to be a standalone airline. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't have airlines in each one of these African countries as much. I mean, if it's possible, yeah. What I'm saying is the mindset, the business model says, I'm part of a consortium. I'm part of a group in Africa that will take me places. And that's the way the business model should be run. I'll give you an example of what we've done. I think the most successful startup airline in Africa in the last 30 or 40 years is A-Sky in Togo. Okay, I was there from day one. We actually helped put together the strategy with the founder of EcoBank, by the way, a banker who started an airline, which he had the vision though. So he and I, Mr. John Doe and myself, we did a lot of road shows, but throughout the whole process, we pitched it as a regional airline. It just happens to be based in Togo, but everybody in West Africa, both Francophone or Anglophone Africa, we pitched it to them saying, this is going to be your airline. Yes, its hub is in Lomé, but you are going to benefit from it today. So it's one of the few airlines that made money. Last year made money, the year before it made money. So it's because from day one, it was structured to benefit in a bigger market. The operational needs, the demand was there, it just tapped into that. Today, it's a fairly sizable startup airline 10 years on. So those, I wouldn't call them low-hanging fruits. I'll call them the obvious things to do if you want to succeed and survive. I understand the national pride. I'm originally from Ethiopia. So as an African, I understand the pride each country has on owning one of these things. But it's a capital-intensive industry. And if you don't manage it well, you go out of business very quickly, as all of them have done that. So these are just investing in people. Actually, the aircrafts, the beautiful aircrafts Boeing and others make, they're just tools for you to deliver on your services. So the most important aspect of the business is investing in people. I think there was a talk about the Aviation Academy in Addis. It's the biggest in Africa. It's a full service aviation academy designed not just for Ethiopians. In fact, a lot of the students there are from across Africa and beyond, because the Ethiopians over the last 70-some years, Ethiopian Airlines was created in 1945. From day one, in people, the pilots, the cabin crew, the MRO, the technicians, and just as importantly, the C-suite, the management level, they're all airline people. They know the airline business in and out. If you don't do this, no matter how wealthy a country you are, you're willing to subsidize an airline, you go out of business. And a lot of them have, I mean, you mentioned, I'm sorry to say, South African Airways. South Africa is a very wealthy country, which could afford to subsidize SAA. But SAA hasn't been able to come out of bankruptcy. In fact, I think there's a lot of talk of what they want to do next, maybe liquidate it, start. So it doesn't matter how wealthy you are, especially these days when commodity prices have collapsed. Most countries, their fiscal is limited. I think the solution would be, I'm going to run it. Yes, I'll own something, but it's going to be a collaborative. It's not going to be a standalone. My business model is not going to be. And Shamsu will tell you that none of these airlines, except one, are credit worthy for the aircraft manufacturers. So you end up paying extortionist-like interest rates, right? If you can even get that, by the way, right? So you're a loan shark, exorbitant rates. Business single digits, the best single digit margins. And how are you going to make money when your competitor, like Ethos, is getting credit ratings of, investment grade ratings from the manufacturers, the aircraft leases companies, and everybody else. Okay, so by partnering, and from A-Sky, the day they started operations, all the aircraft, even though it says A-Sky, you should see the tail. It says ET, because ET essentially provided the aircraft. So that means it lowered A-Sky's operating costs from day one, leveraging ET's creditworthiness. This is what we need to be practical. This is some of the benefit. Volume purchases, bulk purchases, that comes from being partner of, say, Ethiopian Airlines. And that's the model we need to replicate in Africa if we're going to have successful airlines. So you asked me about low-hanging fruits. I'm giving you some practical things that comes by thinking like that.
Right. Wow. You've just hit so many things. I don't want to get into the financial side of things right now, but I think CFA would call it off-book accounting, which is basically leasing. And if you ought to look at some airlines' financials, all you see are all these leases, which I'm thinking now, you're actually raising some valid points. Your credit score is not that good to walk into Airbus, to walk into Hamburg and tell Airbus, hey, I need 2 planes. It's not that good. So why not approach ET and ask for some, 6-year-old planes? Well, 6 is actually young. And, just have a conversation. Shamsu, let me bring you in here because, well, you and Idris can talk more to this particular conversation. I know, Idris, you worked for Arik Air at one particular point. Shamsu, give me a sense of the financing predicament that we face right now. Negato here just raises a very interesting point. Is it even feasible for us to consider carriers on the continent primarily owning some of these crafts, or is it a safer bet to go that particular direction, off-book a kind of financing, which is of course leasing? Give me a sense of, it might be a tough question. Maybe you could just take off the Boeing hat and answer this question as just Shamsu.
Thank you, Arnold. From the manufacturer's perspective, there is no big or small customer. Any customer that comes with a plan is served the same way. Obviously, if you buy 100 of airplanes, you may get a better deal than if you buy one or two, but that's not the real challenge. In my view, when you look at it from the Africa's perspective, and before I touch on that, buying versus leases, you need both, but you need to, while you develop your business, you need to make sure that you also building equity in order to facilitate your financing. Leasing is an option. It can be a good option, but you don't build equity in leasing. So at a point, you cannot develop your business without building equity. So at a point, you need to find a way of building that equity to improve your financials. But what I wanted to point out is the big challenge is the market access for African airlines. The main challenge is the market access. As much as I highlighted the size of the fleet, it is because the market is fragmented and it's small. And if I want to look at the market around my country and in the region, I can develop a business that can need 2 or 3 airplanes, but it's not viable. So the main issue is the market access. And SATAM, the Single African Air Transport Market, addresses that. It provides the opportunity to have access to a larger market, like CFTA. It will just provide an opportunity. Now, it will, for the private sector and the government to come together and develop models that can serve that market. Today, the private sector is not interested in aviation, not much. Those who are coming there are few entrepreneurs, but there are not many. So the World Bank, the African Development Bank, the financial institutions consider that they will invest in airports, they will invest in service navigation and navigation services, but they will not invest in aircraft nor in airline because they believe that the private sector should do so. But there's no private sector in Africa that is investing in that. So there should be a way of having government at least create the conditions for private sector and government to do so, because we need this industry and we need to build it on our own model, not because in Europe the private sector has invested in it, the government have washed their hands of it, that we should do the same in Africa. Government should be worried that how do we help, how do we create conditions for the private sector to come into that sector? While they are coming in, we should support it by creating enabling environments for access to finances, for access to skills, for access. When I was at Air Afrique, we had our own school like Ethiopia does today, but it's an expensive proposition. We cannot, why can't we have an education system that provides for the skills that will serve in aviation? Why do airlines have to bear the cost of that training? We train lawyers, we train bankers. Why don't we train aviators? And if we have to have a training institution like Ethiopian does, which is fantastic, it should be in a way that everyone benefits from it, like the MRO. Ethiopian has a fantastic MRO that benefits the whole continent. But Captain Idris can tell you, wherever you study a project in Africa, they want a training facility, they want an MRO for how many planes? Less than 10 airplanes. It doesn't work. There's no miracle. So we have to think systemically, look at the big picture, and and I think African Union can play a role. at least bringing government together to think that way, bringing countries together to think that way, to facilitate the development, emergence of African airlines that are viable, that are sustainable. And one last thing, you don't look at, as much as an airline is a business, you have to look at it not only as a standalone business, but as a part of a system. And I understand clearly countries that invest in airlines, knowing that it makes losses because it creates connectivity for the country, and it creates an environment for other opportunities to arise, like tourism, like skills development, and so and so. So the model should not be just profit less and revenue less cost equal profit is negative, then you have to disappear. No, you can be a loss-making entity as part of a systemic, as part of a system that is profitable. So there are other views, other ways to look at things.
Great. Thank you for that, Japsu. You've touched on some things that just do appeal to what Captain Idris is working on right now. Captain Idris, I understand you're working on a particular aviation school in Ghana. Could you just shed some more light on that? Jamsu has asked such a pertinent question. I mean, we train lawyers on the continent. There's law schools, you know, there's GPs and medicine schools. Why don't governments arguably do the same service? Just speak to that, Captain.
Thank you very much, Arnold. Just to give you a background and how the idea came to mind is that obviously we have been monitoring the progress of the SATM and we have been looking also at the progress of the CFTA, etc. And then from the flight deck perspective, the technical perspective, I keep asking myself the question, is the continent ready to absorb the growth that we are looking for? When it comes to safety measures, as you can imagine, I've been exposed to different type of operation, and then I can recall one of them which was quite significant. I was actually flying from West Africa to Central Africa, and then I was very close to be, to have a mid-air collision with an aircraft, okay, in Central Africa. And then obviously those kind of situation happens. You have your aircraft system, etc., and then you can be surprised by a particular event. But what was specific about that incident, because it was reported officially, is that we could see the aircraft coming from a far end. So we knew exactly that it was a particular threat. And despite all the attempts to communicate with the aircraft, which was not operating the proper way in a particular, what we call the semi-sacred environment, the crew decided to disregard our advices, and then obviously we actually execute the maneuver to avoid them, and then everybody went back home. Mind you, 2 weeks after that event, we heard that that particular crew actually crashed the airplane somewhere. Okay, because the aircraft were faulty, and then they were not able to see the mistake that they have on the aircraft, and then but we were able to see that. So when it comes to what we are looking at the SATM and the CFTA, my main concern right now is, do we have in Africa the proper safety level to make sure that our expected growth will not be hampered by another tragic accident, which could be more frequent as we know we increase the capacity of every single airline and the African space, etc. So over the past 2 years, during some consultancy operation in Ghana, We have introduced to the government of Ghana, Minister of Aviation and the GACL, the Ghana Airport Limited Company, what we know will be the best way to actually tackle those particular threats and be ready for the future. And we are not reinventing the wheel. We just want to copy what Ethiopian has done successfully, and now on which ASky now is heavily relying on, which is a first-class training center for Western Central Africa to provide pilot training, engineering training, cabin crew, management training, very importantly, and also make sure that we have different type of safety courses, especially now with the COVID, QHSE element, etc., to make sure that we are the future airline and the current one have affordable training and then have direct access to the training center. Not all the airlines in Africa are training at ET. A lot of them are training in Europe, in Middle East, in South Africa, and then it is Forex. They're spending thousands or $100,000, to secure the training in different parts of the world. Now the COVID has made us realize that with the issue of the cash flow, the treasury, which is now dried up in pretty much all the airlines, it's time to re-engineer our business model to make the airline more resilient. Starting where? By the bottom line. We need to look at every single unit cost of the airline and see how we can actually make them straight as much as possible. So the GACL, Ghana Airport Limited Company, we sign an exclusive MOU. They are allocating 10,000 square meters land surface in the heart of Accra. We have finalized the feasibility study as well in partnership consultancy aspect with a major training organization in Europe, with whom we have done all the financial modeling. They are operating about 10 training aviation organizations worldwide, so they have the expertise. Think of us as the little John Doe partnering with the Ethiopian, in term of training. We just want to copy the business model that is actually successful. And then the idea is to pitch the project to all those West and Central African airlines and say, look, this is a training center. You can actually reduce your training cost by at least 25 or 30%. And make actually that saving cost to actually convert into something else. It actually could be dividend, or you actually increase now your capability to raise funds and then to make deposit for particular aircraft acquisition, either Boeing or Airbus or whatever they decide to choose. And then based on that only, we will not only make the airline more resilient, they should be able to improve their bottom line by reducing the direct operating costs. In partnership with some local banks, we will be able to create scholarship so that the bank can finance the training of any Ghanaian, Nigerian, Cameroonian, Nigerian, and anybody on the continent, and make sure that now we have the qualified human capital which will fuel the industry that we are looking forward to grow. Otherwise, every single project that we have could easily, and I'm saying from the technical point of view, it can easily be affected and negatively affected if we do not have, the right person at the right place, the pilot, the engineer, the manager, etc., etc. And that is only because of safety, of course. So in about 10 days, 2 weeks time, we will be done with the financial modeling, etc. We have managed to raise the first $3 million out of the 30 that we evaluated. And then, yes, definitely we have project to discuss with Boeing for simulator acquisition. And maybe now that I've met Ricardo and Negatu, I think that could be a very safe investment in due time for the aviation industry. Thank you, Arnold.
Okay, thank you for that, Idris. We'll give you a private session after this.
Thank you.
Yes, just after this. I'll share the numbers. Gentlemen, I'm afraid we're running out of time. Just your parting remarks, and as you actually share those, you could maybe throw in something which I ask any aviation enthusiast, how do we create the next ET? Let me start with you, Ricardo. Your parting shots and how do we create the next ET? Nagatu, you had already touched on some of these, but maybe you could just throw in some other few words of wisdom. Ricardo?
As many people already said, you cannot see one part of the puzzle all alone. It is really about moving the sector. I have to say I agree with all of my colleagues. COVID is a terrible thing that happened to all of our generation. But at the end, the situation is still there. For me, I agree with what actually was said 1 second ago. I think by Chamso, if I'm not wrong. I don't see any, I see very little private sector interest at the moment. But to be honest with you, I don't see it only in aviation. I don't see it tout court, if I may use the French expression. I don't see it in general because many private companies are just retrenching either in their region or in their core business. So this is the situation, which is not unique at all at the aviation sector. But I also believe that I'm a big believer that public institutions are the perfect partner for private ones. And I think this is the moment to move on creating the conditions. We say create the market in order to attract public and private investment in the future. I fully agree that financing must go with sustainability. I don't think that anybody like to throw money away. But I think what is important now is really to create the conditions to develop the market, because at the moment, as I think Zeme said in a few minutes ago, I would find quite difficult to find private investors to invest in any part of the market, being lessor, being aviation, airline handlers, whatever. So this is what I think. We have to start a little bit to redesign everything. And I think that this regrettable situation actually gives us a little bit of time to push in that. I think, as I said at the very beginning, I think that when I talk to sovereign, when I talk to ministers and all the rest, they're aware of the plight of the aviation sector. The problem is that at the moment, they are stuck in a situation with falling fiscal revenues, additional costs. So it's quite difficult at the moment to focus only on one sector when there are so many emergencies.
Right. Johnson?
Thank you, Arnold. Low-hanging fruit, for me, it's cooperation. And whoever has already started venturing in the aviation sector should look at improving his model by cooperating with others, like cooperating on the network. How far can I go with what I have, with my resources, and how can I cooperate with others to go further? And so that means building code sharing, sharing resources, and virtually creating those groups that we are talking about. So that is that's easy. It's a matter of talking and partnering, building partnership, and it's possible. And I think the airlines don't have the choice today. They have to go that way. They have to go talk to each other, find a way of sharing the resources. AFRA is doing something very interesting, having created a platform for them to share capacity. That's a good idea. They could also share other things, training facilities. They could share even skills, bring people from Ethiopian who has developed some skills, or Rwanda who has also developed. So sharing resources and trying to improve the model that they have until they can benefit the full market, the access, having the SATAM, having the free trade area grow, and having the market access that they need to. They can change the model anytime, but start with what you have, optimize the opportunities, and grow with it. And when the market is big enough for you to fly alone, you can fly, you can go alone. But today it's impossible for those all African airlines as they see them to continue going alone. It's impossible. It's just a matter of time where they collapse. So, but it's still time to think about it, talk to each other, coming together, sharing what can be shared, and improve the business model on that. That would be my recommendation as a low-hanging fruit.
Thank you for that, Jabsu. Nagatu?
Well, your question was, how do you become an ET, or at least something to that effect? Well, the easiest thing to do is partner with ET, of course. I mean, that might sound like a flippant comment, but it really is, because when you partner with them, and I have to disclose that I've seen them and acting, they bring the successful ET system with them. So you as a startup, you as a national flight carrier of a country X, don't have to reinvent the wheel. They bring it with you. The talent comes with it. The maintenance support comes with it. And all the things that will make you successful. So you can just focus on your core competency. But I think beyond that, it's incumbent on us as Africans, government, private sector, to really make it easy for airlines on the aviation sector in general, but airlines in particular, to succeed. Remove the barriers. Remove the things that are making it difficult for airlines to succeed. I think earlier there was a comment that was made that, well, the profitability of the airline should not be the only matrix to look at to see if they succeed, because there are the ecosystem is broader. I completely agree. However, if you say, I need to own an airline to promote my tourism sector, but if you're subsidizing it infinitely at a higher amount than what is coming in tourism, you're actually in the negative. So the solution is, I know this sounds odd, but you don't have to own an airline for tourists to come to your country if the tourism sector is actually well developed. There could be 10, 15, 100 airlines who will be willing to bring in the tourists from Europe, the US, the Asia, and all that for you. So you can focus on your core competency, which is the tourism sector, the business travel, the MICE business, okay? That way, so there will be no justification to say, to do this, I need to lose a ton of money to support my tourism. No, that tourism by itself can support the jobs that you need to create, the hard currency that needs to come to your country. You don't have to own an airline just for that, because the losses, the losses you incur in that airline business will offset any gain you thought you had. And it will just sap the limited resources African governments have.
Nagatu, are you saying Rwanda doesn't need an airline?
No. Rwanda is one of the, I didn't want to mention names earlier. Rwanda is one of the, first of all, we've been involved in that.
That was a question.
The strategy. Rwanda is the exception. By the way, it just needed a bit more time. And it's actually reached a level where my guess is, I haven't seen their numbers recently, but eventually they will be profitable. But even the way they're run now, I mean, Rwanda is a unique country. I mean, in the earlier panel, we discussed Rwanda extensively, so I didn't want to take up time here.
Okay.
It's one of the very few exceptions that actually needed, I don't know if they got a bailout, but if they did, that would have been absolutely justifiable, because the model that has been developed, that's being rolled out, is very unique. It's now become the hotspot for MICE business, the convention business, the tourism business, and all that. It's created that. We don't see that in most other African countries. So that's, I'm glad you mentioned Rwanda. Since you mentioned it, I thought I'll pick it. But in most other countries, you don't need to own an airline if that's your justification, unless the business is viable, okay? So the concluding point, though, is, as I said in the earlier panel, Africa's fundamentals pre-COVID are actually strong, okay? It has very significant upside potential in GDP growth, the overall growth of the economy, specific sector. If that's the case, the collaboration aspect of we create hubs, we create airports, airlines within those hubs, but serving all 54 countries, but remove the barriers. 80%, I'll repeat it again, 80% of into and out of Africa air travel is controlled by non-African carriers. Essentially, we're sending hard currencies, hard-earned dollars from commodity exports and other things back to wherever, the Gulf, Europe, and Asia. That's what we're doing, okay? Whereas if it had stayed on the continent as a region, especially now with the Africa Continental Free Trade coming into play, saying we want to own the continental value addition component of it, it makes no sense for us to offload the hard currency to offshore airlines. So these are the kinds of things we need to keep in mind when we talk about the airline industry, but which at the moment is in dire straits. I think that needs to be underlined again.
Thank you for that, Nagatu. Ade, just briefly, we're just summing up everyone's comments, what we could do if we were in charge to make the next ET, and of course your parting shot.
Okay, thank you very much. So I agree with the comments that I overheard about the need for cooperation, better cooperation and collaboration. But I just want to give a spin on this, giving an example of what was consolidated, and when the banking sector was consolidated and when the energy sector was consolidated. We actually saw that these three elements because of their strategic importance and the fact that they're network oriented and customer focused, led to certain things that happened. Lower prices, so affordability increased, and everyone, even the rural farmers, are able to have a mobile phone that helps them to do so many other things. Increased output, increased quality, optimized capacity utilization, productivity, profitability, and investment. And you take all of these 7 elements, and there's no reason why they cannot happen in the aviation sector in Africa. So to my own low-hanging fruit, I say again, I'm a firm believer in the potential and the promise of the single African air transport market. It can be done in Africa. We have the European example and tinge, but in terms of economic activity, GDP contribution, trade, investment, and so on, in addition to the social elements. And that's one example, and there are others in other parts of the world. So there's no reason why we can't do this. So from a practical point of view, how do we eat the elephant? One piece at a time. IATA and some of the other stakeholders, Shamsu and so on, we have an industry group called the African Aviation Industry Group. And we're looking at breaking down the specific elements that will remove those barriers that Negatu and Ricardo were talking about earlier, to make sure that we can have a full implementation. And we're starting with, a list of countries that we've already identified, 10 countries in Africa that we have seen that on several levels, they pass muster, they can move forward. They have, safety and security rankings. Their regulatory and policy framework are strong. They have optimized infrastructure, both on the ground and in the air, that will support the industry. They have ease of mobility for both visas and customs. They have a manageable taxes and charges, at least not quite as high as in some other parts of the continent. Human capacity development is an issue, and they continue to strive for excellence and to build a pipeline. And finally, nation, but they're also linking to tourism, linking to have all of these parameters. And so we want to work with those 10 countries almost as a pilot to see how we can showcase collaboration. Of course, wrapping into the cooperation element from the airline point of view. So finally, again, I believe in the single African air transport market as a means to transform our aviation sector and Africa's potential. I also believe that it can really fit in with the African trade area and can deliver on what other sectors have delivered before it. Thank you.
Ade, thanks for that. Idris, again, you will have the last shot. Just your final remarks. Oh, I think we do not have Idris. Terrible timing indeed for him to drop off when we were just about to close up. Lady and the gentleman, many thanks for making time to actually join us for this particular panel discussion. My many thanks to Adefunke Adeyemi, who's the Regional Director, Advocacy and Strategic Relations at for Africa at IATA, Captain Idris Chedu, who is the Managing Partner at Prodigy Avia Solutions. Of course, from the World Bank, Ricardo Politi, who is a Global Director, Energy and Extractives Industry, and also Regional Director, Infrastructure for Africa. And joining us from DC, Zamedine Negatu, who is the Global Chairman of Fairfax Africa Fund, LLC. And last but not least, Mr. Chamsu and Jorin, who is the Director of Government Affairs and Market Development, Boeing International Sub-Saharan Africa, Aviation Safety Director, and Africa Boeing Commercial Airplanes. Lady and the dear gentleman, thank you again for making time to speak to us. I send my regards. If you have any inquiries about the painting behind me, just reach out. Yeah,
Okay.
just reach out. Yeah, I have a commission on that. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Have a lovely evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you're joining us from. And allow me to hand over to the dear Maggie Mutasi. Very hard walking, though. Right?
Thank you so much, Anna, for that fantastic session. Thank you so much, Zamedine, Ricardo, Shamsu, Adeyemi, and Captain Idris, who dropped off just a few minutes ago. It's been a great pleasure having you on the session. I have to say, it's very hard to host the last session. And at this point, it was even at a very awkward time because of the time differences. Some are in the US, others in Africa, but we're so grateful to the attendees who stayed with us. I think the numbers are really great. Also considering the fact that it's been our last session. The conversations continue tomorrow. We'll be launching the Mansa magazine, which basically highlights some of these issues from aviation, investment, trade, and the AFCFTA, and how the continent will look like in 2020. And we'll have some amazing sessions on telling the African story in times of crisis, but also creatives and sports, how they can be leveraged to achieve economic growth, but also better livelihoods in Africa. We invite you to join us still if we have some time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Maggie,
Thank
you.
Thank you. Thanks for
Thank you, guys.
Sparing time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Have a very lovely evening.
And thank you, co-panelists. It was nice having you, seeing you.
Pleasure, guys.
I'll leave you with a video from our team. Joseph, just for it.